Happy Election Day, everyone. Welcome to the 1 Yard Line. I'm your host, Jared Vinecourt, joined by my co-host, Nick Tororik. Nick, great week of NFL this past weekend. We have a lot of stories to get to. I'm so excited.
Oh, I am too. It was honestly a great weekend of NFL football. There were a lot of really just good matchups going on all weekend. I mean, we saw a lot of teams with really good records, high seeds going up against each other, and a lot of the games came down to the wire. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it.
We'll get to the good teams sooner or later towards the end of the show, but let's start with some bad teams because obviously a lot of people don't want to hear about the bad teams, but there are some storylines with still some bad teams.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start off with an NFC-AFC matchup this week between bad teams. The Las Vegas Raiders and the New York Giants. Las Vegas Raiders, with their new interim head coach, Antonio Pierce, who played for the Giants, won a Super Bowl with the Giants, comes out and beats his former team, gets his first win as a head coach with the Raiders. Raiders score 24 points in the first half yet alone.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing it with their backup quarterback, Aiden O'Connell.
Not the backup anymore. He's the starter now.
Jimmy's the starter. Jimmy G's the backup now. They benched Jimmy G, and now their new starting quarterback, Aiden O'Connell, 16 for 25, 209 yards, a 90.3 QBR. What'd you see in this game, Nick, between Battle of the Suckies?
I mean, with O'Connell, honestly, he gave you everything you'd want to from a rookie quarterback in his second career start. Didn't turn the ball over, was efficient, was accurate. I thought he played pretty well. But overall with the Raiders, I just think it shows how much they hated Josh McDaniels. They really did not like Josh McDaniels.
It was more like a toxin and poison among the group.
Mm-hmm. It just seemed like the Raiders' locker room vibes have completely flipped since McDaniels has gone. We heard about the story of McDaniels calling the team meeting and getting called out by the players, and then Antonio Pierce talking about how he was on the 2007 Giants that beat Josh McDaniels' coached Patriots. And he brought that up. Josh McDaniels didn't like that. That made for an awkward situation.
Of course, yeah.
So that whole meeting just seemed really awkward. It seemed like the whole McDaniels situation in general is pretty awkward. And I like what the Raiders are doing. I like that they're going to a fresh start with a new coach. They're going to get a new GM too, probably this offseason. And I just think the Raiders need to embrace this new era. They need a new era. They need to rebuild because obviously what they've been doing the past 2 years has not been working, and it doesn't seem like the culture's been very good either the past few seasons. Obviously there was the stuff with Derek Carr last year, the benching. It just seems like the Raiders' locker room has been not a great place the past few years, definitely. And sometimes an interim coach is all you need to give life to a locker room. Honestly, we saw it with the Raiders 2 years ago when they fired John Gruden. They brought in interim Rich Bisaccia. He led them to the postseason. They went through a lot of adversity that season.
And I still don't understand why they didn't keep him.
Yeah, I just can't believe they hired Josh McDaniels after that. Hiring Josh McDaniels in the first place, dumb idea.
We've seen him before as a head coach, even before he was with the Raiders, and he was terrible then.
I mean, sure. You can say he's a good play caller. You can say that. You could say it's Tom Brady is the reason that people think he's a good play caller. But at the end of the day, he's not good with people skills. He doesn't get along with his players. He seems to manipulate all of his players and make them all want out. He did the same thing
and play bad.
Yeah, he did the same thing with Jay Cutler and Brandon Marshall in Denver. Pushed them both out. They both requested a trade out of there. He did the same thing now since coming to Vegas with Derek Carr. He pushed him right out. So at this point, it's just clear that Josh McDaniels was the root of almost all the Raiders' problems. I mean, they're not the most talented team, don't get me wrong. They definitely need to rebuild through the draft and start hitting on draft picks because that's what they have not done. They have not hit on any draft picks in the last few years. So the Raiders, I like that they're taking a step towards turning it around. Hopefully that they, with the next coach that they hire, if Antonio Pierce does keep this job even, I just hope that the next coach that they have is able to figure it out, change the culture, and hopefully get the Raiders back on track because they've been pretty bad for a while now, besides 2021.
And let's be honest, the Raiders, they want that winning mentality, and it felt good when they beat the Giants. Mm-hmm. And we saw that video on all over social media, them in the locker room
smoking cigars.
After the game. Mm-hmm. And let's be honest, they were smoking cigars like they won the AFC Championship or something. Like you're 4-5. Like let's
Yeah,
cool down
I mean,
a bit.
I think at this point the Raiders, they know that they're not going anywhere this season probably.
Well-
So they probably just want to enjoy the good new feeling of having the new coach, the new feeling of actually winning, and
Let's be honest.
being a loose locker room.
Like their division, AFC West. Obviously, Kansas City's winning that.
Mhm.
Denver's in last, without
Yeah.
a doubt. And the Chargers are 4-4 with their win last night on Monday Night Football against the Jets.
Mhm.
And the Raiders are 4-5. And let's be honest, like the Buffalo Bills, who we'll get into later in the show, the Chargers are up and down. Like
No,
that
definitely,
first half
definitely.
last night against the Jets, their offense was atrocious. If it wasn't for Austin Eckler, they probably would have lost that game against the Jets.
I mean, yeah, I mean their defense completely shut out the Jets. Basically, they didn't give up any touchdowns, so their defense deserves a lot of credit. But yeah, I think the Chargers are a clear second team in that division, and the Raiders and Broncos are kind of jockeying for last place in that division. It's kind of how I expected it to play out for the rest of the year. And I don't expect the Raiders to like all of a sudden play a lot better the rest of the season because they aren't a very talented team. They have some really good high-end players like Max Crosby, Devontae Adams, Josh Jacobs. They have some really good players, even Colton Miller, their left tackle. But the reality is their defense isn't good enough. They don't have the quarterback play up to par with some of the other teams in the AFC. So I think that this year the Raiders, the coaching change will definitely bring better vibes and better attitude going forward in the locker room, but I don't think it'll continue to translate to a lot of more wins.
I definitely think they can maybe go 6-11, 7-10.
7-10
at
team,
best.
probably 6 to 8 wins is
Yeah.
probably where I see the Raiders ending up at the end of the day. So, and they're going to be looking for a QB in the draft next year too, unless O'Connell plays really well the rest of the year. Which, I mean, I like O'Connell, but I don't think he's a franchise guy, and I think the Raiders need a franchise guy at this point.
Speaking of looking for QBs, we go to the other team, the Giants, and
Daniel Jones.
that's not really a way to describe them. They're not a giant at all. They're a dwarf at this point. Only 6 points. Daniel Jones out for the season with a torn ACL. You give all this money to quote-unquote Danny Dimes for having one great year, not turning the ball over, and now you're just wasting your money on a quarterback who really has no talent. I don't think he really has any talent at all. So the Giants are going to have to run with a backup QB for the rest of the season, and they're going to have to look for a quarterback in the draft too.
Mm-hmm.
As a Giants fan, how do you process this season, Nick, and how do you go forward in your future draft picks?
As a Giants fan, I really don't know how you're feeling right now. Like, you got to be feeling pretty bad about the Daniel Jones contract. You have to be. I mean, giving him 4 years, $160 million, although you can get out of it after next season. But the thing is, there's no way out of it after this season. And we don't know how much now with the torn ACL, if that'll go into next season, if he'll end up missing time next year as well. And if you're the Giants fans, though, I feel like you got to be, I don't know if you're upset with how this, like,
You kind of expected it.
but it's like you made the playoffs last year. You won 9 games. You won a playoff game in your first year with Brian Daboll and Joe Shane running the team. And now this year, it's just been complete regression. Like, what happened to the Giants this year?
They're not on the same page. It was like with the Raiders and Josh McDaniels. They weren't on the same
I
page.
mean, I definitely think at this point you have to look at last year as just a fluky overperformance because, I mean, coming into this year even, I looked at the offense and I didn't see a whole lot of talent on that offense. I mean, Saquon Barkley's a great player, but he can't be your whole offense. Your running back cannot be your entire offense. He just can't be. They brought in Darren Waller. Daniel Jones hasn't been able to get him the ball consistently. And receiving core-wise, they don't have anybody that's really of any value. Like, their receiving core is bad. I knew that coming into the year, too. Like, looking at their receiving core, Darius Slayton as one of your top options, Isaiah Hodgins, the rookie Jalen Hyatt hasn't
Waller's out.
Yeah, the rookie Jalen Hyatt hasn't made that big of an impact. So I definitely think if you're the Giants this offseason, you got to go out and get receivers. You need receivers really bad. But you know what you also need is offensive line. Their offensive line is absolutely brutal.
Because Jones got obliterated.
He
all
has,
the time.
yeah, and it feels like their O-line has been bad for for years now. It's been years we've been talking about the Giants having a bad O-line. They invested 2 high draft picks in Evan Neal and Andrew Thomas at offensive tackle. Andrew Thomas, he's been really good. Evan Neal, not so much. At this point, he's looking like a bust of a top 10 pick. He just is. At least your other top 10 pick from last year, Kayvon Thibodeau, he has been amazing this season, so that's one bright spot if you're a Giants fan. I still think their defense overall is solid. I think they've got some good young players to build around on defense, and if you're the Giants, I think you just got to go into next year, put a receiving core and offensive line around whoever it is at quarterback. It'll probably be Daniel Jones again next year because you're going to have to pay him all that money.
Mm-hmm.
So I think next year, you're going to have to plan with building around Daniel Jones and just trying to turn it around next year because this season's a lost season at this point. It just is.
Yeah. And whoever they do draft in the draft next year, it'll definitely be nice to be a learning year.
Maybe
or he'll come in mid-season if the Giants are 2-6 again next year.
Yeah, I think though maybe if you're looking at a top 5 pick, which I think the Giants are at this point, Marvin Harrison Jr. in the cards potentially.
But that's the thing with
Rome
teams
Odunze from Washington, is he in the cards with the top 5 pick? I think the Giants need to go after receiver in the draft next year.
That's the thing with teams that are really bad. Like you have a double whammy when your quarterback and your wide receivers suck. So
it's pick one or the other.
Yeah, it's really hard to pick one. It's really hard to pick one.
But I just don't think they draft a QB next year after 1 year into the Daniel Jones contract. I just don't think they will. I think
maybe if they get him better weapons, he'll perform better.
He might, but I mean, we've never really seen Daniel Jones with a great receiving core. So can he be good with a good receiving core? Possibly. We don't know, but I just think at this point, this is year 5 for Daniel Jones, and he's only really had 1 good season out of the 5. To me, I can't be confident that Daniel Jones is the guy moving forward, but I do think you have to give him another season next year because the Giants are just in a tough spot with all the money they gave him.
We'll have to wait and see. We move on to another AFC-NFC matchup. Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Houston Texans, What a performance by CJ Stroud. I mean, obviously you're repping right now Ohio State. CJ Stroud is just having a sensational rookie season, definitely rookie of the year at this point. And he sets the NFL single game record for passing yardage with 470 yards. Passing Andrew Luck went 30 for 42. 470 yards, and I'll put that up on the screen for you. 5 touchdowns with a QBR of 147.8 rating. Nick, how sensational is CJ Stroud for this Houston Texans team right now?
He's unreal, and as someone who's been an Ohio State fan, I've watched pretty much almost all the games he played in college the past few years.
Me too.
I knew CJ Stroud would be a good NFL quarterback. I knew he would be good. Did I think he would be this good right away with going to a Texans team that has been arguably the most incompetent franchise in the NFL the past few years? No, I did not think his rookie year that he'd come out and just be – he's playing almost MVP level football as a rookie.
Game-winning drives in the fourth quarter.
He is setting records as a rookie. I did not expect this right away.
Nobody did.
I mean, I don't know how you could. That's putting this type of expectation on a rookie quarterback is insane.
Because we've seen it with Ohio State. Quarterbacks that are from Ohio State and get drafted in the NFL do not have success.
Yeah, I've always thought there was a stupid narrative because it's like, oh, you look at Texas Tech quarterbacks, there were no good ones until all of a sudden Patrick Mahomes showed up. Like, I think the whole school narrative is really stupid, and I'm glad that CJ Stroud is finally putting that narrative to rest because I thought it was a dumb narrative to begin with. But I'm just so glad to see what CJ Stroud is doing right now because he's accurate, he makes the right decisions. I mean, he's got 14 touchdowns to 1 interception this season. He's not turning the ball over. He's making the right reads.
He feels comfortable in the pocket.
He does. And it's not like he's just game managing. No, he is throwing the ball downfield, hitting his receivers in stride almost every single time. And even if you look at some of his incompletions from this past week, they were drops. They hit his receivers right in the chest. And a lot of people are like, oh, CJ Stroud, if you can't really compare CJ Stroud and Bryce Young right now because they're in 2 completely different situations. I don't know. The Texans were pretty. I don't think this Texan situation is that good like some people are making it out to be. His receivers heading into the year, like, not that many people have heard of these guys. Tank Dell, 3rd-round rookie. Nico Collins, in year 3, former 3rd-round pick out of Michigan, had never put up even 500 yards in a season heading into this year. Dalton Schultz was a solid tight end for the Cowboys, but he's been even better since going to Houston. Noah Brown, Cowboys fans hated that guy. That guy was not good for the Cowboys.
Unfortunately, yeah.
He was not good for the Cowboys. But
No,
now
he
all
was
of a
not.
sudden, he's playing with CJ Stroud. He's putting up 100 yards a game. So, I mean, at this point, CJ Stroud is making his receivers better. He's making the Texans better. And I think you really got to watch out for this Texans team going forward. I don't know if they're ready this year to compete for anything substantial. I don't think so. It's just year 1. But you got to applaud the Texans front office for what they did this last offseason. They get their head coach.
I was just about to note that out.
D'Amico Ryans, great head coach so far, it seems like. They trade up in the draft for Will Anderson Jr., really good player, and you get your franchise QB. You get your defensive building block, your franchise quarterback, and your head coach all in one offseason.
And it's
what
nice,
an offseason for the Houston Texans.
And it's nice that they brought in Noah Brown and Schultz because they both play the Cowboys. So they're very similar with each other. They know what they want to do to get receptions and yards, and that's what they've done so far. It's just great to see. At the end of the day, you noted out Bryce Young, and with the Panthers, it should be duly noted though.
You got to be kicking yourself if you're the Panthers right now.
The Panthers did beat the Texans though.
It's just one matchup. I don't read too much into that. I think it's just one matchup.
Let's be honest, Nick. If the Texans beat the Panthers in that game, they're 5-2, and they only sit one back at the Jaguars. Right now.
I mean, that game you definitely got to be kicking yourself if you're the Texans. If you did want to make some real playoff noise this season, but I honestly don't think Texans fans care right now because at this point they know
they're just glad they're 500 and above.
Yeah, and they know that they have a quarterback for the next 10 plus years to lead them to hopefully their first ever Super Bowl appearance. And a lot of deep playoff runs going forward. And they thought they had that in Deshaun Watson. Obviously, that fell apart. But it's got to feel so good for Texans fans right now to know that you have a true franchise quarterback. You've got to feel great.
Especially as Ohio State fans. We wish him the best of luck.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm rooting for him so much as an Ohio State fan. I loved him at Ohio State.
Even Noah Brown, he was on Ohio State too.
Noah Brown, definitely an Ohio State guy. And I don't know. I just think Panthers fans, you got to be kicking yourself.
Yeah,
man. You got to be. Bryce Young looks okay. He doesn't look awful, but
he hasn't really impressed me.
No,
not at all.
And his situation is not that much worse than CJ Stroud's situation is. I don't want to hear that Bryce Young's in this terrible, awful situation.
You've been doing your social media research, Nick?
Well, no, I've just been on Twitter, and it's like, oh, Bryce, you can't compare him. Bryce Young's in a bad situation. CJ Stroud went to the most incompetent team in the NFL.
Yeah, the Texans were worse
years.
Last year than the Panthers.
Literally, no one had any good things to say about the Texans before CJ Stroud arrived.
Right.
CJ Stroud is the reason.
He has changed that franchise.
He's the reason we're saying good things about the Texans.
Right.
So don't do that. Stop comparing them.
We move over to the NFC. Another quarterback who's making the newspapers, making the headlines, and we got to see in the preseason in Cleveland, now was with the Cardinals, now with the Vikings. In his first game, Joshua Dobbs goes 20 for 30, 158 yards, 2 touchdowns, a QBR of 101.8 rating. Joshua Dobbs didn't even know the players' names, didn't know the plays, barely knew them, goes out in Atlanta and gets the winning drive and gets a victory for the Vikings.
I mean, Joshua Dobbs at this point, he's honestly becoming like one of my favorite, like not like lesser known, but like, I don't know, what's the right word to describe journeyman
Underrated?
NFL players? I don't know. Josh Dobbs, I just love his story. And he just seems like a great guy. And what's underrated, what people don't talk about a lot, is how smart he is.
Yeah.
He is a certified aerospace engineer with a 4.0 GPA.
Yeah,
so
the guy's a genius.
He is a literal genius. So I'm not
with the angles of routes and the way he's got to throw the ball.
I'm surprised that he was able to learn the playbook and make something happen like that quick. But it's like, if there's anyone who can do it, it's a guy who's that smart, because he is one of the smartest players in the NFL. He did the same thing with the Cardinals, really. He didn't end up starting right away with the Cardinals.
And he didn't with Minnesota either, because Jaron Hall was in, and then he had to come out of the game with a concussion.
He was not expecting to play that game at all. Josh Dobbs was not expecting to play that game. So I just think the whole story of Josh Dobbs is really cool. He spent a lot of years in Pittsburgh not getting any playing time, spent some years on a practice squad, spent last year with the Browns backing up Deshaun Watson and Jacoby Brissett, and then he gets traded, or he ends up on the Lions after getting waived, and then somehow ends up on the Titans starting a Week 18 game to go to the playoffs.
Right.
So he keeps ending up in these insane situations. Like, how does he end up finding himself in these situations? And he keeps making the most of them. He didn't end up winning that game with the Titans last year, but still, he's the guy I feel like you want in these situations. If you just need a quarterback for one game off the street, go get Josh Dobbs. Why not?
I think this is a thing that we're seeing, a little bit of history, if you will. Because remember years ago when Stephon Diggs was on the Vikings and Case Keenum was their quarterback, one-hit wonder for the Vikings. Mm-hmm. Maybe Joshua Dobbs is that same guy now for the Vikings. I mean, if you're a Vikings fan, you definitely have to be hopeful from Joshua Dobbs' basically start on Sunday against Atlanta. Now, granted, Atlanta isn't that high tier of a team.
They have a solid defense, though. Their defense is not bad.
Their defense is pretty solid, but definitely against the bigger opponents, especially in the NFC North. You're going to be going up against Detroit 2 times in 3 weeks towards the end of the season. Mm-hmm. So you got to be ready for that if you want to make a playoff push. Still in the wild card right now. Mm-hmm. So you definitely have to keep your hopes high if you're a Vikings fan right now.
I agree, and I think Kevin O'Connell is one of the best coaches in the NFL. I mean, what he's been able to do last year, winning all those close one-score games. I mean, a lot of that comes down to coaching. When you're in those tight one-score games, team with the best coach that's going to make the right decisions, a lot of times will come out on top in those situations. And now this season, they start off 1-4. People wrote them off. People were like, they're just going to tank. They lost Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, for 4 games.
And they've 4-0 since Justin Jefferson went down with injury. I mean, so if you're a Vikings fan at this point, you went from your thinking your season's over, you lose your best player, Justin Jefferson, then somehow you rattle off 3 straight wins, get to 4-4, start thinking about the playoffs again. Kirk Cousins down for the year.
Then you think you're tanked again.
You think you're screwed again. Season's over again.
And then Joshua Dobbs wins the game against Atlanta, and you get Justin Jefferson
And now you're
back.
5-4. Justin Jefferson's coming back soon. It's like, Vikings fans, you can make the playoffs. You can make a run here. You really have a legit chance, and I'm not going to count them out because Kevin O'Connell's a great coach. They have a good offense. I think, honestly, the Vikings offense is good enough to the point where I think a lot of QBs can have success in it. It's an easy offense for QBs to have 100%. Success in, for sure. Because even when Jaron Hall was in, he looked pretty good. Yeah. He did. He was 4 for 5 for 78 yards before getting hurt. So even with Josh Dobbs, even with a young defense that's been at the start of the year, everyone thought was one of the worst units in the league. They've been playing better recently, too. So you've got a quarterback that just got on your team a week ago, a defense that some people thought was one of the worst in the league, but somehow you still have a chance to be a playoff team.
And I can tell you what, future games in Minnesota, we're definitely going to see a lot of skull chants.
Yeah, definitely.
But we move to another NFC game, Battle of the NFC East, Cowboys and Phillies, America's game of the week, and it lived up to the hype and in the moment. I hate to say this as a Cowboys fan. Unfortunately, they fall, they lose, But honestly, I was impressed with Dak Prescott because I didn't think he was going to play that well, and he used all his receivers. For instance, CeeDee Lamb, 11 receptions, 191 yards. He didn't even get a touchdown. It's like, how does that even make any sense? You get almost 200 yards receiving, you don't even get a touchdown? That's just crazy.
Yeah, that is kind of wild.
The people who got the touchdowns with Jake Ferguson, their tight end, 7 receptions for 91 yards. He is really starting to elevate his game tremendously.
Ferguson has been really good for the Cowboys this year. I was wondering how they were going to replace Dalton Schultz this year. I didn't know if it'd be more by committee with Schoonmaker, Ferguson, and Hendershot, all 3 of them. But no, Ferguson's taken that lead role, and he's been really good.
And even the return man, Turpin. Turpin only had 1 reception for 5 yards, but he had a touchdown too. Mm-hmm. And he gave the Cowboys good field position on special teams.
He's a really good returner, for sure.
Yeah. And then Jalen Tolbert had 3 receptions for 49 yards. He had a touchdown too. So as a Cowboys fan, even though they lost the game, I'm glad offensively for the most part they did well. Mm-hmm. And Dak was able to use more than just CeeDee Lamb. But as for the running game, they really haven't got Tony Pollard going in a while. No. And that was what part of the Cowboys offense last year was how well Tony Pollard did. So it was just a shame and unfortunate that they didn't use Tony Pollard as much as I would have seen as a Cowboys fan, and they had a shot. They missed a 2-point conversion because Dak stepped out of bounds, and 1 yard line, we should call it the goal line for the Cowboys because 4th and goal, short by literally half a yard of getting a touchdown. So those 2 key things really cost the Cowboys in this one, and towards the end of the game, Philadelphia had 3 straight defensive penalties, and they literally just told Dallas, hey, march down the field and get in field goal range, So if Dak would have get that 2-point conversion, Aubrey would have kicked the field goal.
And he would have been tied right there. I mean,
but at the end of the day, very close game. Dak threw 29 for 44, 374 yards, 3 touchdowns, a QBR of 115.2. And then Jalen Hurts, 17 for 23, 207 yards, 2 touchdowns, QBR rating of 130.2. It was definitely an exciting game. It definitely lived up to the moment. But, Nick, as a as a Cowboys fan and as a football fan, you got to think that the Eagles have wrapped up this division but with that win, no?
Oh, yeah, definitely. This is the Eagles' division to lose, for sure. And I just find it funny, though, that Cowboys fans, they like to, I mean, not all of them, obviously, not you, but some Cowboys fans, they like to put themselves on this pedestal, America's team, they're the big bad Cowboys.
I don't say it as much as other Cowboys
This is
fans.
our year, stuff like that. We're finally back. But it's like, are you really celebrating moral victories
Yeah,
at
it's the
this
same
point?
thing, different story.
It's like you still can't beat the top teams in the NFC. I know you played better than you have played against some of these top. Like you played better against them than you did against the Niners.
Yeah.
Good, like that's good. You were so close to winning this game, but I don't think Cowboys are a team that should be like accepting these moral victories. They should want to beat the Eagles and beat the Niners because that's what you have to do to make the Super Bowl. You know that in the playoffs, if the Cowboys want to make the Super Bowl, you're going to have to play at least one of the Niners or the Eagles. You're going to have to. So I don't think Cowboys fans should be like, oh, we were close this time at least, like it's a moral victory. No, the Cowboys still aren't on, like, they're still not as good as the Eagles, and I don't know if they can beat them come playoff time.
Maybe in Week 14 when it's in Dallas, maybe they have a better shot at beating the Eagles. But let's say they do beat the Eagles, and they split the season series. Either way, if the Eagles win the division, they're going to be the top seed. So if they have to go play Philadelphia, they have to go play Philly.
I don't see them winning in Philly in the playoffs.
No.
I don't see Dak Prescott going on the road in a big-time playoff game against a really good opponent and winning a playoff game.
No.
Because you know why? We haven't seen him do that.
And he hasn't even won at home. He lost to San Francisco.
I mean, he beat
in Dallas.
Yeah, he beat a bad Buccaneers team in the playoffs last year. That Buccaneers team was 8-9, had no business being in the playoffs. That was not a good football team. Yeah. I'm not impressed.
That was a gift. That was a gift.
Like you were 12-5 going up against an 8-9 team. What did you expect?
Yeah, you should be.
You better have won that game. And then he's just continued in the Dak Prescott era. The Cowboys have just continued to fall short in these big games, and this is just another example of that.
I mean.
I don't blame this one on Dak, though. Dak played a good game.
No, Dak played fine. He didn't turn over the ball. He did perfectly fine. At the end of the day, it was more defensively.
Yeah, the Cowboys' defense did not play their best game at all.
They didn't get any pressures on Hurts at all. So, I don't know. I mean, I've said this before on and off the show. I really think they could run with Cooper Rush and do better. Or they have to draft someone in the draft, but
they're in a tough spot because it's hard to find better than a guy like Dak Prescott because he's a good quarterback. He's the top 10 to 12. I'd say he's top 10 in the league for sure right now because there aren't a lot of great quarterback play in the league right now.
No.
So I'd still consider Dak Prescott around the number 10 QB in the league. It is hard to find better than that because if you move off that and you don't have a good replacement coming in that you're confident in, you can end up wasting an entire season. And
I'm confident in Cooper Rush, though. He's only I think he's lost one start, and that's it.
Yeah, I just think Cooper Rush is a game manager. I think you're not going to go into Philly. Cooper Rush we saw when he played against Philly last year. It didn't go well, no. Cooper Rush. So I don't think Cooper Rush is a guy who could beat
maybe if he got used to it, he would do better? I don't know.
Possible. I don't know. I mean, I feel like at this point, you got to have more hope that, Trey Lance develops into what we thought he could be when he was a top 3 pick 2 years ago, which he does seem so far off that right now. I don't even know if that's a possibility that he reaches that potential.
Yeah.
But I kind of still think that might have been the hope behind that Trey Lance trade, was hoping that there is some of that untapped potential of the former number 3 overall pick.
He's got to prove it to me because I have at least something to go off with Cooper Rush. I don't have anything to go off with Trey Lance. That's what I'm saying.
But you can't go into a season or you can't put your season in the hands of an unproven Trey Lance. You just can't do that.
I mean, some teams do that anyways.
But the Cowboys want to compete right now. They're not in a place where they can
I'm not saying now. I'm saying next season.
Yeah, because I just don't think the Cowboys want to waste a year trying out a young quarterback for development. So it's just Cowboys are in a
Jerry
tough.
Jones won't want that.
Yeah, Gary Jones doesn't want to waste a season doing that. So I just don't. I think the Cowboys are in a really tough spot. It's can you upgrade from Dak? Possibly, but it'll be really hard to find someone. It could backfire on you tremendously if you run a quarterback like Dak out of town because he's still good. Dak is a good quarterback.
It should be interesting to see how the Cowboys finish out this season and how long Dak stays in Dallas. I'm keeping my fingers crossed like this, Nick, as a Cowboys fan. At the end of the day, I don't have high expectations as fans from Dallas do, but obviously I still love them. Hopefully they do well. We're just going to have to wait and see.
No, yeah, you definitely. But unfortunately, Cowboys script looks the same every year.
Yeah, I hope it changes. But we move over to our final game of the day for the show, closing out here. Sunday Night Football, Buffalo and Cincinnati. Great game in Cincinnati. We talked about it last week on the show, just a little preview. Cincinnati gets the victory over Buffalo, 24-18. Josh Allen, 26 for 38, 258 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and a QBR of 85.2. He has now thrown an interception in 5 straight games, Nick. Is Josh Allen falling off the top of the mountain, Nick?
I don't know if he's fallen off the top of the mountain. I think that the turnovers, that's kind of been who he has been the past few years. I just think
he has been known for a lot of turnovers.
I think that overall the Bills' roster is falling down. That's more what it is, because the Bills' team just is not the same as they just haven't been playing the same as they have been in previous years now. I mean, they're not even in a playoff spot right now. The Bills have been one of the top seeds in the AFC for now 3 years straight. So I don't know what to do if you're the Bills. Like, do you fire Sean McDermott if you miss the playoffs this year? Is that a possibility? That's what I've been seeing some people saying around the NFL, that they might fire Sean McDermott if they miss the playoffs. Like, you got to switch something up if you're the Bills at this point, because you're not winning these big-time AFC games. I'd argue the Bills have been similar to the Cowboys the last few years, where it's like they're a good team, they're going to make the playoffs, but can they compete with the Chiefs or the Bengals or any of the other top AFC teams? I don't think so. I really don't. And they haven't been able to compete with them when they've had better rosters, when they've been the number 1 seed. So what makes you think that they'll be able to compete with them this year when they're 5-4 and the roster overall is just not as talented?
Yeah, and they're going to have to face the Jets again, who they lost to in the opening week of the season, and Miami, who honestly they handled Miami pretty well. So we'll see if they'll be able to do that again. But the reason I pulled out my phone, next 3 games, Nick, for the Bills, home against the Broncos, they should win that.
They should, but they've lost some games that we've thought they should win before. They've gotten caught sleeping.
Then they go back-to-back weeks on America's Game of the Week. They'll face the Jets in Week 11, which obviously that's a game that Bills fans have circled because they want revenge for what happened back at MetLife Stadium, Week 1. And then, well, I'll do the next 6 games here because their next 6 games are pretty tough. So after the Jets, Week 12, they're at Philadelphia. They face the Eagles. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a tough match.
Yeah.
And then Week 13, bye week. Week 14 and Week 15. Week 14, the Chiefs. Week 15, the Cowboys. So those 5 games really determine for the Bills if they're a playoff team,
Definitely.
in my opinion.
No, definitely. And the AFC is kind of loaded right now. Like, one team that I think wins 9 or 10 games is going to miss the postseason in the AFC. That's just what it's going to come down to.
We've seen that happen before.
We have, and there's just too many good teams in the AFC right now that one of them is going to get squeezed out. And I just think that this Bills team, with a tough schedule going ahead, there is a real chance that they don't make the postseason this year. And that's just crazy to say after how good they've been the past few years. We thought that this would be a team that would have a long window of success, that we thought that Josh Allen, Sean McDermott, Stephon Diggs, they'd be the ones who finally get the Bills over the hump and get them that first Super Bowl ring. Right now, they're going to have to switch something up. I don't think you get rid of, like, Allen and Diggs. You got to keep those guys. Those guys are the only reason right now that your team's even any good, right? Allen and Diggs. I think at this point you got to consider making a coaching change. You got to consider switching your offensive scheme.
I think you need to get someone to help Von Miller.
Because
besides him as a defensive end, as an edge rusher, who else do you have that can help him out?
I mean, Leonard Floyd's been pretty solid for them this season, but I mean, Von Miller's still, he's not even fully back from, like, he's not playing all the snaps right now. So, and you've had a lot of injuries on defense. You lost Matt Milano, Tre'Davious White, 2 of your best defenders. But I don't know. If you're the Bills this offseason, you're going to have some really tough decisions to make. You're going to have to make some changes because you can't keep showing up and losing to the Bengals and Chiefs. Like, you're not
in the playoffs,
in the regular season too.
Yeah.
So it's like, when is stuff going to change for Buffalo? I don't know.
And that game is going to be interesting against the Chiefs because if I remember correctly, they're going to be at Kansas City. So they'll have the home game against the Cowboys, but at Philadelphia, at Kansas City, that just isn't a good recipe
No,
for
not
success.
at all. Not at all. And it also, I keep seeing this everywhere. It's like the Bills' biggest win in the Sean McDermott and Josh Allen era is a loss to the Chiefs. That's their biggest win.
That was an overtime.
Like, that game is the whole reason that the Bills, that game like kind of put the Bills on the map, really. Put them, like, after that game is when people started saying, oh, this Bills team can win a Super Bowl. Josh Allen's going to be a playoff performer. So their biggest win, their biggest moment in this era is losing to the Chiefs.
Right.
Like, that's what they're known for,
Yeah.
is losing to the Chiefs.
Yeah, they've done it twice, I think.
Yeah, twice in the playoffs to the Chiefs, now once to the Bengals. So, I mean,
Speaking of the Bengals, we go to them, the other side of the ball. They get the victory. Joe Burrow, 31 for 44, 348 yards, 2 touchdowns, a QBR of 108.9. And leading the way is T. Higgins. He had 8 receptions for 110 yards. And now the Bengals sit tied for second place in the AFC North with the Browns and the Steelers. All 3 of those teams 5-3, behind the Ravens, who are 7-2. Nick, my question to you is, with the Bengals at 5-3 right now, do you think the Bengals are back and have a chance to overcome the Ravens?
yeah, I think so. I said last week that I think the Bengals are fully back at this point after they beat the Niners. I mean, they've beaten now 2 of the best teams, or 2 of the teams we thought were 2 of the best teams in the league, in the Niners and Bills in back-to-back weeks. Joe Burrow's back to putting up the numbers like he has been the past few years. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, they're putting up amazing numbers. The Bengals are back. They're just as dangerous as any team in the AFC. We know that. I mean, again, like we said, they're the only team that has gone into Arrowhead and beat Patrick Mahomes since the Tom Brady Patriots. So the Bengals, we know how dangerous they are. They just need to get in the playoffs, and in my opinion, they have a chance because Joe Burrow is unfazed going on the road and winning playoff games on the road. We saw him do that on his run to the Super Bowl. All the games besides the first one were road games. And he won them all. Joe Burrow's ice cold. You just have to get in. Shut up. You just have to get into the playoffs if you're the Bengals. And at first, at the beginning of the year when they were 1-3, it was looking a little rough because the whole rest of the AFC North was winning games besides them. So it was looking a little rough at the beginning of the year, but at this point, the Bengals are back. They're going to be there at the end.
Joe Burrow seems so comfortable in the pocket. He was able to move. I mean, he did have his heater pad or whatever on his calf, but he said he doesn't really need that much anymore. He looks so much comfortable scrambling out of the pocket.
Yeah, he is healthy now, clearly. If you watched him in that Browns game earlier in the season, or in any of those first 4 games early in the year, he wasn't moving around like normal Joe Burrow was.
Right.
He wasn't driving the ball like he normally is.
He couldn't push off his foot.
No, he looks normal again, playing quarterback. And we know how good Joe Burrow is. He's a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. And as long as he's a Cincinnati Bengal, the Bengals are going to be a good team. The AFC North is going to continue to be a bloodbath. I think it's just going to be so interesting to see how it plays out, what positions those 4 teams end up in at the end of the year. Because, I mean, the Bengals, we know how good they are. The Ravens, they've been arguably the most impressive team in football this year. The Browns
at least.
The Browns have the best defense in the league so far this year. The Steelers somehow keep winning games. We don't know how. We don't.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know how the Steelers just keep winning games.
Well, they face the Titans. Let's be honest. The Titans aren't that good.
But still, they just won't go away. The Steelers don't go away.
They never do. They never do with Mike Tomlin as the head coach.
They never do. No, they have pretty clearly the least talented roster in that division, but they're still up there with all the other teams. So.
And they lost some key defensive pieces against the Titans, too.
Yeah,
they lost Fitzpatrick, and they lost someone else that I can't remember right now. But they're definitely hurting the secondary for sure defensively.
No, definitely. So, I mean, this AFC North battle is going to be intense going down the stretch. We have a big game this weekend, Ravens and Browns. That's going to be a really fun, exciting game. I can't wait to talk about that one on the show next week. So, yeah, the AFC North is a bloodbath like always. The Bengals are going to be there at the end. The Ravens are going to be there at the end. Browns and Steelers probably.
Yeah, and you talk about the AFC North, Nick, I think you read my mind because I just pulled up Cincinnati's schedule on my phone. This upcoming week, they have the Texans. I mean, let's be honest. We love CJ Stroud, but the Texans aren't beating the Bengals.
I mean, I wouldn't count CJ Stroud out at this point.
But it's at Cincinnati.
Yeah.
So, and then next two games. Because Cincinnati, they haven't played a lot of division games.
No.
They're 1-1, or no, they're 0-2. They're 0-2 because they lost to the Browns and then they lost to the Ravens. So after the Texans, Week 11, they go to Baltimore on Monday Night Football. that will be a revenge game for them for sure. They definitely want to beat Baltimore. And then the following week, week 12, they're home against the Steelers. So they really haven't had many division games under their belt yet. So that will give us a good indicator where the Bengals are at with those 2 division games.
Yes.
And then the following week, if that doesn't help us enough, I think it will on December 4th for week 14, or I can't read my phone, week 13, sorry, against the Jaguars. They're going to be in Jacksonville. So if Jacksonville keeps winning and keep playing like they have been, that's going to be a highly contested game in the AFC.
And the whole AFC North in general, they play each other a lot throughout this month of November. The Ravens, next 2 games, 2 AFC North opponents. The Browns, next 2 games, Ravens and Steelers. The Bengals, 2 of their next 3 games are AFC North opponents. So the whole division, they play each other a lot coming in this month. And I think after these next couple divisional games, we're going to know a lot more on how the AFC North is going to stack up at the end of the year.
I mean, November's just a great month for football.
It really is. No, it's the heart of the NFL season. Like, arguably, I'd say it's like when the NFL season is really in full swing.
That's when
the
you really
games start
know.
mattering, and the games start really mattering.
That's when you know if your team's a playoff team or not.
Yes, and even with college football, November's the most important month. You got to win your games in November. So I just think November's a great month for football.
Thanksgiving.
I'm looking forward to these matchups throughout the month. I really am. Yeah.
It'll be very exciting to see the matchups this weekend. And very exciting for you guys tuning in to episode 3 of the 1 Yard Line. Make sure you give us a like, a follow, and a subscribe. Share to your friends and family. Make sure they tune in to this episode and next week's episode. And make sure you follow the Come On Ref page on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. Make sure you also follow the Akron Aviators on Instagram. We're going to be covering their games all season long, so make sure you tune in on YouTube to watch the broadcasts and the games there. And make sure you tune into our show, Come On Ref, Wednesdays at 11 a.m. on YouTube as well. It's a mouthful, Nick, but I got it all in.
Yeah, definitely just tune in to the show to Come On Ref tomorrow at 11. We'll have a lot more. We'll talk more than just NFL there. We'll be talking the Michigan scandal. We'll be talking the World Series. We'll be talking all that fun stuff that's been going on in sports, because right now it's just a great time for sports.
Yeah,
it really is.
all the sports are in swing.
And definitely tune in Saturday for our first broadcast of the Akron Aviators game. It'll be me and Max from Come On Ref on the call. Jared will be out doing player interviews. It's going to be a great time. It's going to be a great season. I hope you guys tune in with us for the whole
game
season.
number 2 for the Aviators, for home opener facing Team Network from Detroit. So hope you tune in. Until next week. Goodbye, everybody.
Guys.